I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, Pokrovsk train station closes for civilian evacuation as the front line in the east creeps closer. President Zelensky replaces his long-standing foreign minister. New allegations of Russian interference in American politics are revealed, and we speak to a witness of yesterday's devastating Russian airstrike on Lviv.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
The first duty of my government is security and defence, to make clear our unshakable support of NATO and with our allies towards Ukraine.
Kyiv stands strong.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Thursday the 5th of September, 2 years and 199 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by our associate editor Dominic Nicholls, assistant comment editor Francis Dearnley, and breaking foreign news reporter Kieran Kelly. I started by asking Dom for the latest news from Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, hi David, hi folks. Let's start in the east of Ukraine. Pokrovsk train station has been closed for civilian evacuations due to a deteriorating security situation. That comes from Donetsk Oblast Governor Vadim Filashkin speaking today. Reporting comes from the Kyiv Independent. Now, evacuations for civilians will depart from the train station in Pavlorad, that's in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. The city is about 100 km west of Pokrovsk. That statement was from state-owned company Ukrainian Railways. Now, they say the gathering of people takes place at designated safe points, the details of which are available on Ukrzaliznytsia hotlines. That's Ukrainian Railways. They say boarding points for rail transport will now be varied to comply with safety protocols. It's thought that there are 26,000 people left in the town of Pokrovsk, down from around 60,000 at the start of the full-scale invasion. Sticking in the area, Russian forces are recently said to have advanced slightly southeast of Pokrovsk, about 10 km away, and southwest of Donetsk city, although Ukrainian forces are said to have regained some positions directly west of Donetsk city, so the area is still incredibly violent. Now, just moving, I know it's leaping about a bit, but let's move up into Russia. And President Zelensky says that Russia has pulled over 60,000 troops into Kursk Oblast to face the continuing Ukrainian incursion there. President Zelensky was speaking. He gave an interview to NBC News. He said the idea and one of the goals of the Kursk Oblast operation was diverting Russian troops to their territory. Today I can say that they've pulled over 60,000 troops there. Now that is up markedly from the only other figure that we've really been able to hang on this that came from General Syrsky, the head of Ukraine's armed forces, who said in late August that Russia had diverted 30,000 troops to the area. This reporting also comes from the Kyiv Independent. Neither they nor us are able to verify those claims. However, sticking on the theme, today's British Ministry of Defence intelligence update says that the average daily Russian casualties, which they say is killed and wounded, so they're not including missing, they say that's increased in August to 1,187 a day. Now, they're citing figures from the Ukrainian General Staff, which has proved to be reasonably accurate over the last 2.5 years of this war. So, yeah, of course, there'll be some blurring around the edges, but they are reasonably accurate reporting, we think, from what we've seen over the last couple of years. That would mean that since the start of this phase of the conflict, since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, Russia has likely suffered over 610,000 casualties. Now, that increase in August is almost certainly due, this is Defence Intelligence view, almost certainly due to Ukraine's Kursk operation and Russia's continued pressure in Pokrovsk to try and capitalise their motion there. Now, they do say Russia continues to rely on mass to mitigate their lack of personnel and equipment capabilities, and that's always going to draw a much higher casualty rate. So the British Defence Intelligence say that although Russian pressure on the whole front line will continue over the next month, their capability constraints will likely continue to reduce their ability to exploit any tactical successes into wider operational gains. Russia's casualty rate will likely continue to average above 1,000 a day throughout September, as Russia continues operations on a wide front all the way from Kursk inside Russia and down across the front line as we know it in Ukraine. Now then, still in Ukraine, a cooling tower at the currently Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant required demolition after a fire in August rendered the structure unusable. This comes from the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi. He was speaking during a visit to the plant. So the fire there on August the 12th caused significant damage, though it didn't pose a threat to nuclear safety. Ukraine and Russia have accused each other of starting the fire. IAEA say they're unable to determine the cause. This was Mr. Grossi's fifth visit to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant since the start of the full-scale invasion. He was there yesterday inspecting various sections of the plant, including a pumping station and the nuclear fuel storage facility. Now, in a video at the plant, when he was talking about the cooling tower, he said, "Until today, we hadn't been able to get to this point high up in the tower so we can assess in a much better way the damage that occurred. This big structure is not usable in the future, so it will probably be demolished at some point," although he gave no timeline for that. Now then, Russia is said to have moved 90% of its aircraft used to attack Ukraine outside of the all-important 300-kilometre zone from the Ukrainian border. Why is 300 kilometres important? Because that is the range of the ATACMS that they have access to at the moment. This comes from US National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby speaking during a press conference in Washington yesterday. So in response to a journalist's question, Mr. Kirby said, "The argument that somehow you just give them ATACMS and tell them they're going to be able to hit the majority of Russian aircraft and air bases that are used to strike them, it's not true. It's a misconception." Now, you'll remember the US began, after much wrangling and arguments and all the rest of it, began providing Ukraine with ATACMS, the Army Tactical Missile System, to give it its full name, in spring this year. The range is up to 300 kilometres for that missile system. Now, while the weaponry has been used in Russian-occupied Crimea, Washington's restrictions do not permit their use currently on Russian soil. Kyiv has lobbied hard for Washington to lift these restrictions and allow Ukrainian forces to hit air bases and other military targets beyond that range. So when asked whether the US was going to consider any changes to the policy, Mr. Kirby said, "I don't have any policy change to speak to today." Bit of a holding statement. His statement confirms a claim made by the Wall Street Journal back in August that cited an unnamed US official who said that Russia had transferred 90% of its military aircraft to bases beyond the reach of long-range ATACMS. You'll remember that after prolonged pressure, Washington has permitted Ukrainian strikes with certain US-supplied weapons on Russian territory, but only just across the border and under certain circumstances, i.e. it's got to be directly in support of the Russian incursion in the north of the country. On a related subject, Moscow has warned the US not to cross another red line by giving Kyiv longer-range missiles. Now, it looks like Ukraine and the US are inching closer to an agreement that would see Ukraine given access to the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff missiles, brilliantly referred to as JASM. Now, these can go even further, they've got further range, basically. US officials saying they could reach targets deeper inside Russia. With a range of about 230 miles, it's a step up from ATACMS that have a range of about 190. Now, Russia has repeatedly warned that supplies of long-range missiles to Ukraine would breach its red lines. We hear a lot about these red lines. Yesterday, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said he wouldn't be surprised if the US yielded to Ukraine's demand for the weapons, adding that President Zelensky was egging on the West. He then said, "But they should understand they are joking about our red lines here. They shouldn't joke about our red lines." Right, okay. So don't joke about his red lines, fellas. It gets very testy. Now, Mr. Zelensky he stepped up calls for the West to give Ukraine long-range missiles in the wake of yesterday's strike on Lviv, in which 7 people were killed. There's pictures on social media today of long lines of civilians in Lviv giving blood. Mr. Zelensky said, "Everyone who persuades partners to give Ukraine more long-range capability to respond to terror fairly is working to prevent exactly these kinds of Russian terrorist strikes on Ukrainian cities." And then still on the theme of air defence, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced yesterday that Germany is going to provide 17 additional RST air defence systems to Ukraine by 2026. So Herr Scholz said Germany has already delivered 7 RST systems previously pledged, and that Germany will send 4 of the additional 17 by the end of this year. A German government official told Bloomberg yesterday that Ukraine will receive 12 medium-range and 12 shorter-range RST systems by 2026. And then just finally for me, David, Belarus confirmed the downing of a drone earlier today, shortly after the monitoring group Belarusian Hajun reported that the country had downed 2 Russian attack drones. So according to Belarusian Hajun, that's an OSINT project, open source intelligence project, the drones were down near the city of Homel. That's located right in the southeast of the country, right down in the bottom corner, about 35 kilometers from the border with Ukraine's Chernihiv Oblast. The air alert was active in Ukraine, in the border region, from about 2300, 11 p.m. last night to just after 10 a.m. today, this morning, due to the threat of Russian drones. And Belarus say they recorded an airspace violation of the state border, quote, presumably by unmanned aerial vehicles, unquote. That comes from Sergei Frolov, who's Belarus's chief of the general staff and first deputy commander of the Air Force, putting out a statement. They said, due to the timely actions of the anti-aircraft defence forces, all violators were destroyed. They said there's an investigation ongoing, but I think they probably know where it came from. Now, according to Belarusian Hajun, there have been multiple cases of Russian Shahed, or the family of Shahed drones, going off course and back into Belarus over the past few weeks. We've reported on a few of these. At least 6 Russian drones reportedly entered Belarusian airspace during a recent mass aerial attack on August the 26th. Minsk, however, has never publicly raised objections to Moscow over these reported incidents, probably because Lukashenko knows which side his bread is buttered. But that's us up to date, David.
Well, thank you very much, Dom, for talking us through all of those updates. Francis, can I come to you? There's been a lot of movement on the Ukrainian political scene. What have you been seeing?
Thanks, David. This week promises to be a significant one indeed for the Ukrainian government, with Zelensky seeking the biggest overhaul of his administration since Russia's full-scale invasion almost 31 months ago. Joe covered yesterday the resignation of Ukraine's top foreign diplomat, Dmytro Kuleba, one of the most recognisable members of the cabinet and freshly returned from his trips to China and elsewhere. But evidently his work there was not considered effective enough to keep him in post. As you'll know, his pleas for air defence systems and looser restrictions on Western missiles appear to have been largely unsuccessful in recent months. There had been rumours for some time that it was likely he would be reshuffled when the inevitable time came, but nonetheless, whenever a major figure on the world stage, as he is now, is moved on, it is a noteworthy moment and comes with raised eyebrows. Breaking news in the past 40 minutes or so is his being replaced by Andrei Sybiha, who served as Kuleba's first deputy minister since April. As our friend Christopher Miller of the Financial Times writes in his excellent summary on the reshuffle, he is an experienced multilingual diplomat, seen as one of only a few insiders to have the president's ear. He previously worked as the deputy head of Zelensky's office in charge of foreign policy. Before that, he served as ambassador to Turkey and held 2 posts at Ukraine's embassy in Poland, roles that will help Kyiv navigate those 2 important relationships. Now, in the same piece, which we'll link to in the show notes, Christopher speaks about how some disquiet within the Ukrainian parliament has been voiced at the appointees in this reshuffle. To be honest, says one, there are no new faces here. Speaking on condition of anonymity, they said several outgoing ministers as well were viewed as loyalists in the government and would be coming back in similar roles in other forms. Another voice from an opposition party told the paper that the changes seemed arbitrary and were happening now because the president simply wants to change something. So, big developments this week in the Ukrainian political world. More on that as we get it. I expect we'll have a full picture tomorrow. But as things stand, most Analysts seem to be saying that this is a notable reshuffle with some of the big figures, but not introducing lots of new names. So sort of reappointments within the same sphere, the same circle of individuals who are Zelensky loyalists. But as I say, let's wait until we have a fuller picture before we draw a full stop on that. Now, on to other stories. A major one broke yesterday in the United States after the Biden administration accused Moscow of carrying out a sustained campaign to influence the outcome of November's presidential elections. A number of high-profile conservative influencers in the US have said they are victims of an alleged Russian disinformation campaign. It's an interesting way of putting it when you hear the details, with Tim Pool, Dave Rubin and Benny Johnson publishing statements last night addressing the allegations that a US content creation company they were associated with had been provided with nearly $10 million from Russian state media employees to publish videos with messages in favour of Moscow's interests and agenda, including over the war in Ukraine. CNN has the story, which relates how the Justice Department indictment doesn't name the company, but claims it is being funded by Russian operatives working as part of a Kremlin-orchestrated influence operation targeting the election. The indictment, which was unsealed in New York's Southern District, accused 2 employees of RT, the Kremlin's media arm, of course, of funneling nearly $10 million into this unidentified company, as I say. CNN has independently confirmed that the company is Tenet Media, which is a platform for independent content creators. It's self-described as, quote, a network of heterodox commentators that focus on Western political and cultural issues. That matches the language contained in the newly unsealed indictment. The goal of the operation, according to prosecutors, was to fuel pro-Russian narratives in part by pushing content and news articles favouring Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump and others who the Kremlin deemed to be friendlier to its interests. Now, as I say, Johnson and Pool, they are very much denying this. They say the story is produced in its entirety by our local team, without input from anyone external to the company. Now, it may well be true that they were unaware, but many will ask, if so, why they didn't ask questions of where the money was coming from. Extraordinary amounts of money funding the operation that they were a part of. This should all be seen, of course, in the context of the Biden administration announcing a sweeping set of actions to tackle a major Russian government-backed efforts to influence elections and other entities in the United States. It includes sanctions on 10 individuals and entities and the seizure of 32 internet domains. Taken together with this indictment of RT employees, the actions represent the biggest response so far to these influence operations targeting American voters. The US has also accused Iran of trying to hack the Trump and Biden-Harris campaign last month, so I think we can expect there to also be some further movement there. Once one pulls on this thread, it tends to be that other things very quickly unravel too. So a fascinating, if not especially a surprising story, and I imagine there will be similar tales of such an ilk that will follow in due course. Now, staying with the United States, Donald Trump has given an interview with Lex Fridman, the well-known Russian-American computer scientist and podcaster. In it, he has a fair bit to say about Ukraine, and I'll quote him in full. As president-elect, I'll have a deal made. You've got to get that deal done. That could end up in a third world war. But I can't give you those plans, because if I give you those plans, I'm not going to be able to use them. They'll be very unsuccessful. You know, part of it's surprise, right? They won't be able to help us much. He then accused Kyiv of lying about the number of people who've died in the war so far, insisting the actual number is, quote, a lot higher than people think. When you take a look at the destruction and the buildings coming down all over the place in Ukraine, I think those numbers are going to be a lot higher. They lie about the numbers. They try to keep them low. They knock down a building that's 2 buildings long, 2 big buildings, and they say that 1 person was mildly injured. No, a lot of people were killed, and there are people in those buildings, and they have no choice. Once they start coming down, there's no chance. Now, there's a lot one could say about that. It's strange, though, that Trump seems to focus on civilian deaths in that statement, that critique there, as most observers of the war would say that it is likely that it's military casualties that are far higher, not civilian. But that wouldn't really constitute dishonesty from Kyiv as such, as no government really releases accurate statistics of those killed in battle. That's been the case for a very long time and is true with London, Kyiv, even the United States. Nothing especially new from Trump here, I think it's fair to say, but clearly he hasn't changed his tune in the past few months in terms of the war. It's very notable that he has so little to say about the Kursk incursion. I think many people would have hoped that that would have perhaps cut through and changed the narrative somewhat about where the momentum was travelling. But if so, it wouldn't appear that it's got through to Donald Trump. And just finally, David, because I know so many listeners are interested in sanctions, the FT has another interesting piece on how Russia has been secretly acquiring sensitive goods in India and explored building facilities in the country to secure components for its war effort, according to Russian state correspondents seen by the newspaper. Moscow's Industry and Trade Ministry, which oversees defence production to support the full-scale invasion, drew up confidential plans in October 22 to spend about $1 billion worth on securing critical electronics through channels hidden from Western governments. The plan, revealed in letters to a shadowy trade promotion body with strong links to the Russian security services, aimed to use significant reserves of rupees amassed by Russian banks from booming oil sales to India, seeing it as an alternative market to source crucial goods previously supplied from unfriendly countries. And the piece goes into a lot of detail for those who are interested in Russian and Indian partners targeting dual-use technologies, how Moscow was pumping investment into electronics development in India, and indeed the growing relationships that has happened since. The ISW also report on this story and emphasise that Putin met with the Serbian Deputy Prime Minister yesterday on the sidelines of the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, where they discussed, among other things, the removal of bilateral trade barriers to reverse declining trade levels, with the Serbs saying Serbia will not impose sanctions on Russia and will not allow its territory to be used for anti-Russian actions. So no surprises there with Serbia nor India, but it underscores how Moscow has been building these sanction-proof networks for a very long time and with some success, which would partly explain why Moscow has proven so resilient to sanctions that have been instilled and installed for now the best part of 2.5 years. And I think we can expect, again, there to be more revelations of this sort coming out in the next few months as attention has become increasingly strong, I think, from Western governments on the issues of sanctions. London has been one of the better parties, but others like Germany and France have not proven as effective in terms of them stopping the selling of entities, products that are helpful to Moscow's war effort to other countries, to third parties that then sell them on to Moscow. And this is all part, including the Financial Times has done some fantastic work on this, of investigative reporting, trying to uncover exactly what has been going on. So lots taking place, David, as ever.
Well, thank you very much, Dom and Francis. Just one brief comment from me, Francis, just on something that you mentioned there when you were relaying the news about Trump's interview, where he said about the Ukrainian government lying about the number of people who've been killed in the war. I must say, when we were there back in February, I stayed on a bit longer, as you know, and was at Zelensky's press conference. I think that was the first moment the Ukrainian government had put a number on how many they said had died. And I've just got the BBC report in front of me when he says 31,000 troops have been killed since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. I must say, I do remember talking to Ukrainian friends and colleagues later on that day and in the subsequent days, that there was quite a bit of anger about that statement, because I think, I'm sort of casting back slightly in my mind to my memory, but there was anger that everybody knew it must be higher. So for the government to say that, when that just wasn't how society felt, was deemed as quite insulting. So it's an interesting point, and just something to bear in mind that, as you said, Francis, you're quite right, governments don't usually talk about the casualties they've suffered. It would be poor strategic sense to do so. But I do remember that anger in Ukraine over the government giving statistics which were seen as just not accurate. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Francis, but we certainly can if you would like.
I'll just jump in very briefly, David, on that. I think very few people who are commenting on this war would disagree with what you've said and what the Ukrainians were saying there when you spoke to them back in February. Numbers are much higher. Trump is probably correct when he says that, but it's important to distinguish between military deaths and civilian deaths. And I think that probably, from what we understand, broadly speaking, the civilian deaths figure would make logical sense. Because, of course, if we're being cynical about this, it makes sense for Ukraine to be honest about its civilian deaths. It's something that shows the international community the scale of the horrors that they are enduring, and also it doesn't necessarily have a strategic impact. But when it comes to the military aspect of this, then it would be illogical for them to be saying, we've just lost thousands of troops in this battle or this sector or whatever, because it affects the ability for those other troops who are there, who are still operating, to be in as secure a position as possible. So I just think by saying we need to be nuanced on this, we're not saying that it's wrong to critique some of the figures and some of the numbers that have come out of Kyiv. Indeed, we've done it many, many times on the podcast, but it's important to understand it in that more nuanced way, which unfortunately has a tendency, and I think Trump's remarks lean into that, as to not being so, and just saying, again, feeding into this narrative that Kyiv is dishonest. Well, all governments are dishonest in war, David. That's part of it.
Thank you, Dom and Francis. Earlier, I caught up with foreign breaking news reporter Kieran Kelly, who's been talking to a witness of yesterday's horrendous Russian airstrike on Lviv. Kieran, thanks so much for taking some time out of your day to talk to us. Yesterday, you were on the live blog looking at these awful strikes in Lviv. How did you get in touch with the people you spoke to, and who are they?
Yeah, I've been speaking to some people with the World Jewish Relief Humanitarian Agency who have partnerships with local charities across Ukraine. Dozens of partnerships have been kind of helping as many as 330,000 people. So yesterday I spoke to a lady called Sasha, who's an aid worker who works within a project that helps elderly people resettle in Ukraine. She was an art manager, worked at music festivals before that. But like a lot of Ukrainians, her life kind of completely changed when the war broke out, and now she's a full-time aid worker. In Lviv, it's considered one of the safest parts of Ukraine. So a lot of people have resettled there. For the last few years, she's been helping those people resettle.
Well, let's dive straight in and hear your interview.
Could you just tell me initially what you're doing in Lviv for work, roughly whereabouts you live, what kind of building?
I live in Lviv. Before the pandemic time, I was a Jewish singer and the art manager of a big festival of klezmer music. And I worked in the area of klezmer and Yiddish festivals, music and theater stage. Then pandemic changed my life, and now I am honored to work for the organization Platform of Transformation, which is a partner of fantastic foundation World Jewish Relief. And we are so happy to help people to find the new possibilities in this horrible time when they have to leave their previous life in the places where they had to come to run away from because of the war. And we are trying to find good options for them for development, because we understand that it's very important not to stop. The enemy, Russia, want us to stop, but we mustn't do it, never ever. And we are trying as much as possible as volunteers as well to grow up the fields of possibilities for children, for adults, for those who are seeking for a new job, new profession and a new occupation and so on. If you ask me about building, I live in the very nice, very pretty district of Lviv, and I was always a big fan of the architecture around me. It's beautiful gardens and villas and buildings like palaces around. And I live here with my mom, who cannot move because of the sickness. She only can lay in her bed. And of course, it's very stressful because every attack, I never know what should I do if something happens. And today, the attack was so close to the place where I'm living that the windows has been broken, and one of the doors of the apartments has been broken as well. Fortunately, the place where my mother is, the window was okay, and we survived, and we are okay, of course, in a big stress, but we're all right. It's horrible that there are so many killed and injured every day, and we see how the international law, the international human rights position is so weak when it faces just a cruel power of such kind of people like Hitler, Stalin, now Putin, North Korea, Iranian modern government, and so on. So we see how democratic world is not ready for such kind of challenge, and is not ready to protect itself, actually. And that's what went on. And of course, it's dangerous, as for me, not only for our country, but for the entire world. If world choose to live in a democratic way, it must understand that democratic must be protected, like freedom. So I hope that democratic countries will wake up one day and as soon as possible and realize that we have to give strong answer to Putin's Russia and not to allow them to spoil this beautiful world.
Could you describe what you experienced during the attack? What did you hear? What did you see? And then do you have any information about the situation on the ground in Lviv?
Thank you so much for asking. I bring my apologies. It isn't easy to speak about such things, even in native language, because it's always hard to find the appropriate words, but I will try. I was always afraid of such situation because even before the big war, because my mom, as I told before, she cannot move, she cannot stand up from her bed, and I never knew what should I do if something bad happens, because I never know how could I help to my mom to move somewhere. And from the beginning of the big war, it was a huge stress for me because I couldn't imagine what should I do if something happens. And I even tried to communicate with psychologists and to take a lot of medicaments to become calmer. It helps a little bit. And tonight I also took such kind of medicaments. We were sitting with my husband at the floor in the corridor where there are no windows and heard the sounds of, I don't know this special word in English, the sound of the weapon which protects our sky. And then we heard the sound of the explosion, and we realized that it is not the protection of the sky, but it's kind of weapon which wants to kill more Ukrainians. And it was quite close. And then we heard the sound of the glass, which is broken, and try to understand what happened. Is there fire or there is no fire? Fortunately, we were so much lucky that we were a little bit far away from the place where it happens. So just broken glasses, and we were not nearby them because we went to the corridor. We cannot go away to the shelter because we cannot leave my mom alone in the apartment. So we have to stay. But anyway, corridor protected a little bit. Of course, we started to write to all our friends, and all our friends started to write us, and then we realized that people are killed, and the situation is really serious. Like every day for so many districts, because personally, I cannot just imagine how people cope in Kharkiv, in Kherson, in Odessa, in the place, even in Kiev, where there is such a huge chance to be killed every minute. And they continue to go, to develop, to make fantastic projects, to make exhibitions, theater plays. And I couldn't do myself like that. I am full of deepest respect to my folk, which is able to go through these challenging times and to develop. But I feel such a big pain because I understand that so many crazy, talented young people are killed who could build a beautiful world, not only for Ukraine, but in general. And they're so intelligent, polite, they're beautiful, educated, and they're just killed at the front line or like in the streets, like in Lviv today. And the world miss the best of the best. Is this a choice for our world? I don't know. Please forgive me, maybe I'm too much emotional. Thanks again, and I'm so proud and happy that I can cooperate as a volunteer, as a worker for organization which helps people. Sometimes I don't have their power inside me, but those people with whom we are working, who go through the horrible challenges of the big war, they inspired me because they're so strong morally, and I'm just proud that I met them. But I pray that this horror will stop, because we don't want to be a hero, so we don't want that someone will be proud of us. We just would like to live as a normal human being, to enjoy the sun, the sky, the children, and so on. This is quite understandable.
Coming up, we hear Dom and Francis's final thoughts. Dom, can I come to you first then for your final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, David. I'm noting with interest this comment from President Zelensky that saying that Russia's pulled 60,000 troops back to the Kursk Oblast to face the Ukrainian advances there. I just think it's it's a very dangerous thing for him to say, because the experience in Ukraine at the moment is of continued Russian advances towards Pokrovsk, and we heard today about the evacuation efforts are proceeding there, and we've seen obviously in the last couple of days strikes across the country of Ukraine, particularly in Lviv, as we've mentioned. So for President Zelensky to raise what's happening in Kursk, people might start to say, well, okay, great. If you've forced Russia to pull 60,000 troops back there, it hasn't had much effect, has it? Or is it going to? So I just wonder what he's doing by that. It might be he's just trying to tell the truth or try to say something honest. I don't know about the number. I've got no way of verifying that. But it's a wide-ranging interview, of course, with NBC News. But to raise that, it will put the spotlight once again on this mild criticism that's come from a number of quarters that was it right to go into Kursk when there was such pressure in the east. And I think a lot of people might now start to say, well, okay, if you've pulled 60,000 Russian troops out of the main fight, we expect something else to happen. So I wonder if President Zelensky has set himself up for a bit of a comms fail there, and obviously we'll follow that one with interest.
Thank you very much. Dom, Francis, your final thoughts, please.
Well, thanks, David. I wanted to end today with a story of Pavel Kushner, a lone pianist who died slowly and without publicity on the 28th of July, 4 days before a group of better-known dissidents were swapped for Kremlin spies, sleeper agents and killers imprisoned in the West. While the US and Russia were busy finalising the biggest exchange of prisoners since the Cold War, as we reported on at the time, this little-known Russian pianist was dying in silence in jail. The BBC has this story of someone who protested repeatedly against Russia's invasion of Ukraine and began a hunger strike soon after his arrest by the Kremlin authorities in May, later refusing water too. He died not long ago before that prisoner exchange, and after his death, we learn that only 11 people were at his cremation. He was 39 years old. An independent politician in Siberia said that no one had tried to talk him out of sacrificing himself because they hadn't been aware of what was happening. We couldn't chip in and send him a lawyer. We didn't know, she wrote on the Telegram app. He was alone. Now, the YouTube channel where Kushner published 4 anti-war videos had only 5 subscribers when he was arrested by Kremlin authorities. He spent his free time protesting against the war in a solitary protest, a friend described it as, an act by someone who didn't know what else he could do. Now, although Kushner's YouTube channel had single-figure subscribers in his lifetime, his most popular clip has now been viewed more than 22,000 times. I think this story should just underscore that so much of the discussion about blanket brainwashing in Russia is unsophisticated and does, I would say, a disservice to the human spirit. As Christopher Hitchens wrote in Letters to a Young Contrarian, quote, "Whether sunk in the theocratic despotisms of yore or the more modernised totalitarianisms of today, humans have an innate capacity to resist, and if not even to think for themselves, to have thoughts occur to them. We know this empirically, because such people always appear as if from nowhere when despotisms fall." Yes, I would say brainwashing, acquiescence and cowardice are absolutely real phenomenons when living in authoritarian societies. But it is not just that. And these individual cases should always focus our minds as to the importance of remembering the individual acts of bravery and sacrifice that people are making all the time in totalitarian regimes that aren't reported because we simply don't ever know about them.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, our Ukraine newsletter, which brings stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. you can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload. So if you want to hear Ukraine the Latest as soon as it is released, do refer to podcast apps. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message. And you can contact us directly on Twitter. You can find our Twitter handles in the description for this episode. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear.